All right. Last lecture, right? Yeah? Except for the super bonus one of 7:30 a.m. next Tuesday, which you didn't deserve. No one deserves that. But this is a cruel joke on, yeah, so I just want to confirm, like, we don't make the exam timetable, right? Like, we don't do that. That just happens to us from Gary Durr. Everything, it's all Gary Durr's fault, as far as I can tell. Or the president, let's say the president does it. Anyway, it's just assigned to you based on your time slot. Okay. Oh, and if you have any, so a couple of people have approached me, they can't be here next week for whatever reason. Good reasons, not like skiing in Iceland or something, but you know, the conferences and things. So if you have that, then please come talk to me, and I think the solution is to make a video of your talk. But everyone, I'd say this little mini conference, you know the drill, we did it, we had our mid-semester version or late semester version. So same idea, come and enjoy your fellow humans' work. All right, so and speaking to that, the instructions, I don't know what time it is. The instructions for it, right, they're here, so if you need to, you should go over that again. I did have one thing to tweak, which was, you know, I know there's a lot of details here, but when to send it in, please send it in by 5 p.m. the night before, right, which is Monday. Earlier is good. And there's the numbering thing. I guess I'll send out the email again with all your numbers. I need to do that because, but it will be the same as last time. So you can just look at that. All right, right, good. This whole website, just to say, this is our last lecture, the whole thing will stay up. It will just be, there will be this 2018 version. I'm going to rebuild things in other ways, but this piece, as has been basically delivered, will be here. Slides with whatever problems they have, they'll just sort of become more and more calcified with time. All right, so I'm going to finish talking about stories here. There are just a couple of pieces. I'll maybe just touch on the ones that are essential. And then I have this final set of slides, which is kind of a coda to the course about complexification. Just some thoughts. All right, so this is a little section here about the power of stories. And you know, we touched on a whole bunch of pieces here. And as I've said, this is ordered somewhat, but this is all very developmental. And so this was, we just got to this, right? So Rags to Riches is this sort of fundamental story for the US. And this is David Brooks, who's often maligned by the people on the left. They really hate him. But, you know, so he's one of these sort of New York Times opinion people who people get very upset about. But, you know, this was a reasonably, this was an interesting piece. And this is way back before the election. It's about thinking about Trump's behavior and what's going on. Little did he know. But this is talking about the national story, right, for the US. And of course, locally, people have lots of different stories. They have the story of their family and their, maybe their town or their city and so on. But there is this large overall story of, you know, you can make it if you try from any background. Of course, that's not true. Or it's probabilistic, let's say. And then, so this is the Rags to Riches stories, but he's saying, you know, maybe we need something else, something about, you know, redemption, I think, you know, less individualistic, more, I don't know if this will emerge at all, but it's interesting to see someone thinking about this sort of stuff. And there's a whole piece you can read about that. You know, so that's a change, right? This is a change from a Rags to Riches story to, like, you know, like fixing up a disastrous situation. And if you just think about even infrastructure, we're kind of in that category. So this is just another piece about the power of stories, right? So this is just a slide on a list of things where people have come up with stories that are not true and got into a lot of trouble. So a million little pieces. This is, what was this guy's name? James. It's good that I've forgotten. Anyway, it was about, you know, the history of this guy's autobiography and all these trials he'd gone through, and went on Oprah, you know, got some tremendous success. I mean, this book was, you know, top of the list. Oprah says yes, and you get a you know, incredible book sales. Of course, then he had to come back on Oprah and say that it was all made up. So that's a bad situation, right? There's a Wikipedia has lists of lists. Of course, I think they only go out to 3 levels. I think they have a rule about that. But a list of famous fake memoirs. I mean, it's really just something that we love to do. This one was a Harvard student who just copied many different books, which was kind of impressive. It was a real tapestry of other people's works, which of course eventually someone notices. So that was well done. This self-plagiarism. So this was just sort of, like epic effort. This is self-plagiarism where you just start copying your own blog post from before. This is you probably never heard of him, but John Alera was this sort of next Malcolm Gladwell, and we don't need any more. We didn't need him, but he was supposed to be another version of this. This Wunderkind, who was writing about, I think he wrote the book Proust was a neuroscientist or something like this, right? All these sorts of things, and they're great pop psychology kind of things. Anyway, so it turned out that he'd been plagiarizing himself. Like he'd just been lifting his own pieces from other places, Wired, and I think he'd been at the New Yorker, like various, they weren't hidden things that he just sort of pulled out from the cupboard or something. They were published online. So he also had a thing on creativity where he had a whole chapter on Bob Dylan. He made up Bob Dylan quotes. He'd never talked to Bob Dylan. It's kind of ironic because Bob Dylan made everything up as well. But this was just this sort of very ridiculous situation. And anyway, so this all got found out and he disappeared. Armstrong, long time saying I did not do this. I've been tested a million times. This is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And of course, Russia. If you have not seen Icarus, has anyone seen Icarus? This is really a fantastic film. It starts off in a certain way as sort of a documentary of an American guy who's an age group cyclist who tries out doping as just to see what would happen, right? And has a crew filming him and all these sorts of things. Right, so now and then you get pieces like this. Someone goes, I'm not a doper, they go and get doping just to see what happens, You can improve everything, eyesight, it's all good. Anyway, so that turns into a whole thing where they just uncover the Russian doping from whatever, going back maybe 20, 30 years. But it is really spectacular. It's really, really fantastic. Anyway, you should watch that. Icarus, amazing. He got to meet Oprah as well. That's usually where you go to tell people you did something really bad. Anyway, so yeah, fiction that speaks to real. And I've talked about this before, right? So fictional works, the power of like therapy and just envisioning what you might become or what things could become. Unbelievably powerful, right? Okay, random other thing. This is, we have some work on this and we've developed other pieces not published yet, but Shapes of Stories. This is from the great game Australian Rules Football, which you saw some of early on. These are the differential, all of these little wiggles here are differential scores as you go through a game. And so these are clusterings based on particular shapes, right? So this is where one team is, starting to really pull away and then they get thumped for the rest of the game. This is a failed comeback, right? So the team on top wins in all of these. This is a comeback. Looks like they're almost there, and some of them get in front, but all of them end up on that side. So this is the tragic, the valiant effort, the failed comeback. This is a successful comeback, right? So, and we have stories for these. We talk about sports as stories, right? And you'll often hear commentators saying things like, particularly English ones, probably said all this, the script isn't written and so on. So that was an effort here to try and get out the narratives of these things. And I know I mentioned basketball basically being random walks, so you really have to, you can add the story on top. Anyway, so you can get very carried away with that. But, something here to connect to, and this is the work we've been trying to do since, is say, NFL, like how exciting are the games and how much people watching, how much money comes in, how many people turn up, and are games actually interesting to people? I will say that and to add to this with stories, like after the fact, some sports, in my view, lend themselves to being able to be told as stories very well. So actually, American football, to me, NFL has chapters and a whole structure, and it can be talked about in a very sort of serial kind of story way. Basketball, not really. It's a game you watch, and there's some highlights, and there's what happened in the last 3 minutes, and it's sort of, it doesn't have a compelling, sort of Icelandic saga arc to it. Baseball, well, whatever. Okay. But baseball has the epic sort of season arc, I suppose. And then soccer, you just watch and kind of feel pressure and distress, and that's what that's about. Soccer sort of famously hasn't been amenable to Moneyball, right? It hasn't been something that's been quantified very well, and it just doesn't, there's money involved, that part's quantified, but in terms of, tracking players and having all these ridiculous statistics about them, a bit harder. This builds out of that work, actually. So Philip Ball, who's a wonderful science writer, has been, for many decades, done great things, written great books. So he talks about some of our story stuff in here, but he talks, this is, if you want to look more about this, The Story Trap is the piece. He talks about music and all sorts of other areas where there's sort of a story aspect, perhaps. And his focus then becomes, well, maybe that's a trap. And I think I've said that in various ways, right? That there's certain kinds of stories we tell, and that makes it hard for us to understand, particularly systems, collective behaviors, and so on, right? We want to understand a narrative around an individual. I mean, it's just very hard to understand system behavior without simulating it. Okay, that's about puns. You don't need to see that. Okay, so this is taxonomy. So just to sort of have a look at this, there's been some history of this. So this is the sort of the great man theory, right? There's the arc of the hero, and that feeds into, so Joseph Campbell's very famous here, ironically, I guess. And so, right, so who wrote this? Of course, it's one guy. This is behind a lot of movies and so on, right? You can see this kind of archetype. And the idea of maybe 3 acts, that's over and over and over. It's a trap that links to Star Wars. So this is a more recent piece, it's 2005, but this has been deeply influential. It's got a ridiculous title. Cats, I don't know what's going on here. But anyway, so, but it's a 9-act breakdown, and this guy's become quite famous, I think, and so you come in and fix up someone's movie or their screenplay, and you want to see these kind of beats to it. This is a very typical thing. So the second act, someone dies who's important to the main character, like an uncle or whatever. They get blown up, or there's some flashback. You just see this. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but a lot of TV shows and movies are very predictable. You're like, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. So, so that's problematic. Of course, there are efforts to get out of this. I'm not sure about this at all, right? Irony is key, is sort of something that's a thread there. And I've talked about narrative hierarchies, but this is another piece. Okay, so there are a few things floating around, and they're somewhat peculiar. So this is all about, I guess it's a overview of novels and plays and so on. So Shakespeare would be in here as well. It's this quixotic effort to create a taxonomy of all stories. It's incredibly long and really detailed examination of things. It gets somewhat painful to read, to be honest. But fairly elaborate breakdown of things. Has the idea of comedy as being a plot, but that's not really. I don't think that's right. That's a way of telling something. As I've sort of said before, right? Plot and algorithm are connected to each other. Story is something that has a plot. Plot is the internal structure. Well, we'll come to this again. This is. Kill the monster, right? Unbelievable, right? Beowulf, we love this thing, right? And this is about getting back to where you were, right? So this is a survival story. Something terrible happens. It could be cancer. It could be, all sorts of things are framed in that way. Rags to riches, as we've talked about, right? So, doing well. And of course, we like the other version, which is tragedy. Quest, going to find something. Many, movies and stories written around that. Many video games, essentially, you're running around trying to find 5 things and put them together for no apparent reason. There's some where you go somewhere you come back, so that's a sort of journey and return. Tragedy is here. Rebirth, so we're very interested in that one. We love that one. That feeds into all sorts of things. You can, I'm sure, imagine, or whatever, there'll be things come to mind that have a rebirth structure to them. But Frankenstein, right, for example, right? Which is sort of one of the first treatises on AI gone wrong. Yeah, anyway. So, pretty elaborate, and it's not, of course, it's not data-driven, right? Which is fair enough. I mean, this is just this 30-year effort by one person to read everything possible and put it all in, connected like butterfly things, like putting little pins between books onto something. This is an earlier effort, but this is just for a more focused thing. This is for folk tales. Folkloristics. So this classification system, I guess it starts around 1900, but maybe late 1800s. But it is one of these taxonomies, right? So just a big list. There's some, some structure to it and so on. And that's an excellent start. But you could imagine going one step further, and that's if you're interested in this is a great paper to start with. Tim Tangolini is a total superhero folklore champion at UCLA, super interesting person. We just had him speak at our Science of Story Symposium. He studies Danish folklore, but also Korean folklore, which includes K-pop. Does all sorts of things. But he had yeah. So anyway, this is about, let's get to some sort of big data version of this. You can't read everything. You certainly can't read everything across every language or every culture. And so this is a distant reading version of that, right, which has emerged. This doesn't hold up, I don't think. Actually, just from talking to Tangolini. But it's this, this is a real bridging of two different areas that's quite interesting, right? So the evolutionary tree underneath a story. And this is for Little Red Riding Hood. The idea that maybe it's, it's spread out into all sorts of areas, not just, so Europe out into Africa and Asia, and trying to find the origin of it. I think there's a problem with, I think the main problem is that some of these versions of it are just simply translations, right, from the original one. So I think it's a little messed up. But in principle, the idea is fantastic. So fundamental arcs, I think, boiling some of these away, this is just, an assertion by me. So kill the monster. And of course, they can be blended, but these are really like the archetypal structures. Once again, plots are always, there's some time involved, right? That's an important part to them. Rags to riches, so this is riches to rags, right, going the other way. So Kafka's Metamorphosis, starts off pretty bleakly, you're a cockroach, and gets worse from there. But it's not a good situation. So there's something you're finding, right? We love that kind of thing. Usually there's some, it may feed back into killing the monster, right? There's some magical thing that will save you. Romance, right? Big part of all sorts of stories, except for Lord of the Rings, probably. Anyway, so little linear algebra fun here. So this is just stories of the many. They're hard to write. They're hard to produce. They're hard to sort of grasp. So we tend not to put them out there. Think about the U.S. in general. Like the president is this sort of all-powerful character, and I'm not sort of talking about any particular times. Like the president decided this, or the president did it. It's always framed as this one person. There could have been thousands of people involved in bringing together all of the thing that ends up as some decision. But it's framed in that way over and over. Okay, so comedies, I'm going to say, they're not the story, right? They're a way of telling stories. Usually about connecting things that, let's explain comedy. That's always funny. I'm not going to do that. You guys are going to do that, right? Yeah. Okay, so algorithms for life. Let's say this, right? So they provide these paths and trajectories that you do or that are presented as paths that you do or don't want to take, or someone wants you to take or not take. So cautionary tales. If this, then that, right? That's a very sort of fundamental little algorithmic piece. They try to invoke causality, trying to sort of explain why the world is the way it is. Randomness is a problem, so we want to have as much of this as we can, even if it's wrong. So it's all about how you enforce behavior, potentially. So there's some big ecology of stories, right? There are all these it's some big operating system of sorts. Maybe that analogy is too strong. We do live in a computer age. If it was 150 years ago, I'd probably call them steam engines. But it's getting closer to something that's reasonable. But these are competing. Right? There's a whole ecology of these things, and they're competing. Some of them are absolutely up against each other. They're also just competing for space and attention. And we talked about the ones that have a nice holistic structure to them. Wolfgang Mieder, who's here at UVM. Probably, I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he's in Russian and German, and he's the world's expert in, maybe I've mentioned before, in proverbs. He's the total proverb hero. And every fourth proverb you find online on something like Wikipedia will say that he was the proverb hunter. They should make a NBC show on him. Okay. So, and these are all little algorithmic structures, right? So, don't do this or you'll get this. Stitch, right? Preparation. Look before you leap, but you have these anti-aphorisms, right? So we have anti-proverbs that collide with each other. So, right, this is, jump in, do not, jump in and do not jump in. And the heart grows fonder. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? And out of sight, out of mind, right? So usually these are after the fact, right? You're like, this is what happened. Here's my little story for it. Okay. There we go. So hatchings, so let me see if this one works. this is a framing, hatchings, matchings, and dispatchings that an uncle of mine once mentioned. We were at a family gathering. I think it might have been a funeral, and it was, he said to me, this is where families get together routinely. It's for hatchings, matchings, and dispatchings. And I'm bringing this up because, I want to, if you boil stories down, a lot of them really are about survival in some ways, right? They really, let's see if this works.
Before we rehearse, I have an announcement to make. Our boy Grizz is getting married on May 22nd.
Jeez, another wedding.
Life is like TV. Testing tells us that people like weddings, births, and episodes where a character dies.
In the background.
Dumb.
My heart.
Okay. That's lots for those who are fans of this. But yeah, I mean, there it is, right? I mean, that was kind of enjoyable to come across, but that was a long time after my uncle mentioned it to me. So 3 fundamental events, right, of at least non-clone life. Hatchings, matchings, dispatchings. So let me just sort of assert that, right? So we'll see how much this holds up in time. But there's survival algorithms, and they can be for individuals and groups. We saw that right at the start of these, of all of this with the Agtar people of the Philippines. That the stories that they told were about cooperation in groups, so on. And I, what's the definition of story? I had that early on, but the dynamic paths, right? That doing this and this and this can lead you to this sort of outcome, or this outcome and this outcome. And some of them are, they're really true. Like we know from our own experience that that's a true story. It's worth talking about. Then there are the possible kinds of things that could happen, and then the unlikely. Be careful when you drive, right? Because something bad could happen. And this is often sort of attributed to mothers saying this to their children. It's or parents in general, right? That's sort of an old stereotype of that. The being too worried about things. But rare events, they happen, right? They will happen to people because when you add everyone up, they don't become so rare. All right, unifying theme of existence is existence. All right, so that's a little piece there. I know I've talked about memory and turbulence. That's still developmental, so we'll come back to that, and that's good. I have a little piece here at the end to kind of get at emotional arcs of stories. So how do you feed in a story? How do you feed in Moby Dick? How do you feed in, I don't know, Beowulf or something like that, and get some program to extract the plot of it. What's the plot of this thing, and boil it off in a way that then you could compare it to some other one, right? Could we get that Romeo and Juliet is analogous to West Side Story is analogous to Romeo and Juliet? I mean, it's built on top of it, So, is there some way that we could do that without, tricking ourselves? Or The Count of Monte Cristo and The Star's Our Destination, which is a kind of extraordinary 1950s thing. So let's listen to this.
Well, there's no reason why the simple shapes of stories can't be fed into computers. They are beautiful shapes. This is the GI axis, good fortune, ill fortune. Is the shape of the curves of what matters and not their origins. So we'll start a little above average. Is why get a depressing person? Somebody gets into trouble, gets out of it again. People love that story. They never get sick of it.
So this is what I get. Actually, I feel like this is just a little excerpt. So it's here. He has some other pieces in here, and then he talks about
something wonderful. Just loves it.
He talks about some other shapes.
$1 million. You're welcome to do it. Now,
let me tell you this one.
Surprisingly enough, I've said it's depressing. People don't like stories about below average days and people. But we're going to start way down here. Worse than that, who is so low? It's a little girl. What's happened? Her mother has died. Her father has remarried a vile-tempered, ugly woman with 2 nasty daughters, big daughters. You've heard it. See? Anyway, there's a party at the palace that night. She can't go. She has to help everybody else get ready. She has to stay home. Now, does she sink lower? No. She's a staunch little girl, and she has had the maximum whack from fate, which is the loss of her mother. She can't go any lower than that. Okay, so the fairy godmother comes. Gives her shoes, gives her stocking, gives her mascara. gives her a means of transportation, goes to the party, dances with the prince, has a swell time. Boring, 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 boring. Now there's a slight inclination to that line as I've drawn it because it takes perhaps 20 seconds, 30 seconds for a grandfather clock to strike 12. Does she wind up at the same level? Of course not. She will remember that dance for the rest of her life. Now, she poops along on this level till the prince comes to shoe fits. She achieves off-scale happiness.
Now that's just been online. So we use this. I used this as an inspiration for our group a while ago, and I'll show you what we got to eventually. But Vonnegut had this as a. I don't want to play. He had this. He proposed this, I think, to the University of Chicago as a master's thesis. Maybe in the '60s, and they said no, right? And he has one of his autobiographies. Maybe he wrote more than one, I think. But in the 2000s. He's got a whole page talking about this, and he's, some real swear words, like long swear words extended out, what he thought they could do with themselves. Still, he was very upset about it because he thought it was a great idea. Anyway, so sort of inspired by this, we tried to do what he did. Anyway, so what he was talking about. But yeah, he enjoyed himself, obviously, with all of that. So Vonnegut, yeah, and he has an interesting story of, success in that he was almost gave up on the whole thing at some point. He was selling Saabs. He was a Saab dealer on Cape Cod, and he's written about that in various places. But he was basically done with the whole thing, and then some stuff took off. So yeah. So this is another challenge. Like, how do you get this out of something? Right. This is different again to that. What I just showed you was emotional arcs, the overall emotional arcs, which we'll come back to. This would be, it's not plot, but it's the character paths. It's something. We had someone work on this for a bit. We didn't quite, get it all out. This is Primer was the one I was trying to think of the other day. But yeah, this is time travel done well, and that's basically how you feel about it. I think no matter how many times you watch that film. But I recommend it. Anyway, so yeah, and this is what happens if you have a jury for a whole movie. Hilariousness, well done. Okay, so yeah, and I mean, even just detecting when a character appears, that should be sort of possible. Of course, if time is moved around, like Memento and Pulp Fiction, that's going to be hard. But when someone bites it, for example, that's you should be able to see that as well. Right. So where is it? Yeah. So here's Obi-Wan, right, hanging around, and then runs into Darth Vader inexplicably. Anyway, so. This is another version of that, completely different. This is Andrew DeGraff. This is just a whole different thing. But this is a sort of 3D version. This is Empire Strikes Back, which is obviously the best film. And this is Princess Bride. So this is where all the characters go, right? This is the paths of the character. Here's the Cliffs of Insanity. It's quite a beautiful thing. And he turned it into a book. I mean, that's elaborate. Anyway, so that would be impossible to produce, but this seems like something, right? And then you could have the locales and whatever, and then maybe you could create a taxonomy based out of that. That's possible. But this is, so let's look at emotional arcs. So it depends who's telling a story, right? So this is one of the few New Yorker cartoons, actually funny. So, so Ron Swanson, just a good simple tale about a man who hates an animal. Do I have oh, that's a shame if I don't have it. I got to find it. This is very enjoyable. Should be in there. Give me 1 second. This is certainly important. Yeah. Okay. That shouldn't have been commented out. Yep. Just doing things. Okay, good. I know. Let's basically just turn the house upside down. this is pretty great.
Chris, I'm not teaching you anything. We're just building a crib.
No, I know you're not consciously teaching me anything. I'm just trying to siphon off some of your calm, centered wisdom through metaphors.
Metaphors? I hate metaphors. That's why my favorite book is Moby Dick. No frou-frou symbolism, just a good, simple tale about a man who hates an animal. That's enough for today, I think. Does the white whale actually symbolize the unknowability and meaninglessness of human existence? Yeah, no. It's just a fish.
This is pretty much perfect. Okay. I know, we don't need that in there. It's okay. All right, so Moby Dick. So the point of bringing up Moby Dick is it's kind of the book to go to, right? It's one of the ones that people love to chop up when they do some sort of analysis. So this is running our hedonometer thing, which I'm not going to talk about too much in detail, but it's just a simple way of measuring positivity or emotional expression from text. And so we're going to slide a little window through. This is a terrible way to read a book. It's going to be a window of size 3000, right? Just go glom and sort of experience all of those words at once, and then just slide that window through. So you see all these kind of ups and downs. There are lots of sentiment detection things out there in the world. Many of them are kind of black box ones. We have a simple one which allows us to see, which words are moving the signal up and down. And so this bit on the end sort of shows you why the last 10% is not as positive as is more negative than the first 25%. And there are words like, and I'm not going to go into these in detail, but missing and shot and poor, these are all negative. Die, evil, lonely, blind. These are all negative. Cowards and shooting. Negative words, they're happening more often. There are less of these positive words, so these all contribute to drop it down. There's actually less of the word fear. That happens more in the start of the book, and there's more of the word sky. So there's going to be a complicated sort of texture to this thing, but that tells you this sort of bigger story, right? Obviously it's a story, but this tells you a bigger story about things. Okay, so that's a little word shift thing. So this is just using different smoothings. Does that kind of pattern stay? And there's sort of this rise here, and this is the whale wins, right, is what's happening here. It depends. If you flip it upside down, you've got the whale's point of view. So that allows us then to go in and just munch through a whole bunch of books. We have 10 languages. So this is Crime and Punishment in Russian. This is The Count of Monte Cristo in the original French. And, he wins, right? So that sort of pops out. We did this with lots of books. Here's Frank. So we have this online viewer, right? You can play around with that thing. So it should all be functioning. Yes. So you can see, why is this piece low here, for example? And you have to understand these word shifts a little bit, but they're basically word clouds for grown-ups. And why is this low compared to this reference one? You can move this around. Very nice. Andy Reagan was the hero who did all this. You can see, these are just the negative words. There are a few positive words. You can play around with all this. Very fun. And then Harry Potter. So this is, say Prisoner of Azkaban, sort of one of the few ones that goes up towards the end. But this is Vonnegut's, that's what he wanted to do. So this is all of them together. And you can sort of see, why is this little piece so bad here, right? This is the first few books here. So we'll just sort of take them. You can take everything, right? So all of the books compare this one little bleak spot here. So you see these words over here, death and dead and kill and curse and right. It gets a little rough. But this is a really hard problem with many languages, especially English, is passing them into phrases properly. So this is from Death Eaters. And just death, but it's going to be a lot from Death Eaters, but which we don't have that as a separate thing. But that's a bad word. So people, it's going to push it all down. This is a spoiler for you, but this is if you haven't read it, is Dumbledore bites it. Okay, that's the lowest point. All right, and the highest point I think is yeah. So this is a thing to explore and play around with, and then this random craziness. It's a weird assortment of, it's a weird selection of books. Harry Potter, yes. We have a movie one. This is not really published, it's online. We have an online interactive thing for this. As you move around on this one, this is pretty cool actually. So I can't believe we haven't published this. This is some movies, yeah. So as you move around in it, the script is in the background as well, but the script, you can see where you are with the script, right? You can sort of focus in and see what's going on, like what is this point? And we set up a thing so people could annotate the points, right? So this is, for Pulp Fiction fans, this is bring out the GIMP situation. So that is what is a difficult, troubling movie. That is a bleak point in terms of how our algorithm, our simple-minded algorithm went through it. Lots of movies in there. Okay, so that's all sitting there. So we published a paper on this, and this is just some press that someone created for it, which they had some fun with it. They had a great time. This is actually from our paper, because Andy got excited and used XKCD font and all sorts of things. So it was pretty good. I mean, so we have this story that, let me say this. This is how he made a little hedonometer thing. So this little guy, it's still slowly.
We've got Harry Potter. We've got the hedonometer here. We're gonna go ahead and plug in, and it's gonna analyze the words in the book. Here we go. Harry Potter. We've got Harry Potter. It's reading the book, plotting the arc. Things are getting better.
Worse.
Right?
Yep. Anyway, so Andy made this little gadget. There was a whole pile of books, and you could just come along and plug them in, and it read them. I mean, he went to a lot of effort here. I mean, he put a little chip inside each one, and it was pretty cool, right? So all of these, yeah. What is this? Lord of the Rings, Dostoevsky. Yeah, it was terrific. Anyway, that was great. Okay, so out of that, and this is going to look like Fourier, which is going to pop out. I think there are other ways we want to do this as well, but it was a very good start to this. And we did analyze in different ways, right? We used SVD, we used couple of other methods to try and put the arcs together into their major structures. So this would be, and then we classified them, right? So this would be the rags to riches kind of arc. This would be the tragedy one, right? Things are just getting worse. So these are just flips of each other in terms of singular vectors. This is so we gave them some names. So we called this one Icarus. This is Man in the Hole. This is what Vonnegut called that arc. And I will say, I mean, it's great stuff, but this doesn't tell you anything, right? Man in the Hole could be just like it's just getting worse, or you're waiting for someone to come onto the stage, like Godot. But it could be just things aren't great. But it doesn't tell you anything in that title, like where it's going. And there is this is a forward phrase. There is a forward phrase that does actually do that for you. We'll come to that. So Cinderella, but we kept that name because of him. Cinderella, right, has this roughly this sort of shape. And Oedipus, right, starts off well, cast out, things are going well, married his mother. Not so good. Okay. I guess they made these myths up because some stuff was happening in society and they needed to let's make some TV shows that show you should not do that. Okay. This is Andy. So this got written up at the back page of Scientific American, which was sort of a lovely thing. And there was another piece that was included there, which was like sort of the fractal structure of sentence lengths, which is pretty weird. But he was out recording video, actually, I think, for a machine learning course somewhere. Well, I guess he was in LA. I thought he was going to be in Berkeley, but this was, yeah. Anyway, he went for a run and that's where he bought the Scientific American piece. So it's nice little thing for him. This is an effort to so we use Gutenberg for this, Gutenberg.org, which is an open source, contributed thing. You can see which arcs were downloaded, the most, and it turns out to be sort of relatively more of these slightly complicated ones. But, I think there's a lot more to do here. And I think one thing we would want to move away from is things that decompose them. Like, you don't want Fourier or anything like that, really. You want something that says, it's this kind of piece glued to this kind of piece, glued to this kind of piece. Different kind of approach. And ultimately, and this is true for socio-technical things, like some of you are working on some of the Twitter Time series, we'd like to have something that says, here's the kind of algorithmic or the mechanism that's underlying the behavior of this time series at this point, right? It's like there's an external shock, there's a memory of that shock, and then maybe, whatever it is. And then that memory's gone, and you're into some sort of background thing. I think we want something like that. So rather than decomposing it into just shapes, you decompose it into algorithms, mechanisms. Okay, so this is the Man in a Hole, and this is a way of talking about it that actually gives you, past, present, and future. And this, I have been talking about this since before the election, the most recent election, sorry, the most recent presidential election. So this is, right, so Make America Great Again. It's a fantastic template, right? Because it does tell you, it indicates something about the past, something about the present, something about the future, and this kind of shape to it. And in 4 words. Now, of course, it was stolen because that's kind of how that character works. But it was first used, as far as I know, by Reagan and Bush in advertising in 1980. It was Let's Make America Great Again. So it was a little more cooperative. But this has been used by many, many people, like Bill Clinton. Ted Cruz tried to use it in the primaries, but got told it was not his and someone had stolen it, or whatever. This is madness. But in terms of, slogans and powerful slogans, fantastic, right? Really good. People make hats, and I'm there, and it doesn't. So there's this sort of narrative hierarchy idea that I have, right? So that this is this powerful thing that got people, certain groups of people excited, and you really have to work on that part of your, and this is just talking about, sloganeering aspect of politics, which it should be a very small part, but it does have power. Clinton's initial one was "I'm with her," which didn't really show which way things were going, so, and then it became "Stronger Together," which is better, but it didn't have a sequence. Anyway, so that's one thing. As I said, template used over and over again. Mocked, of course, it can be easily mocked as well, but total madness, No one has really managed to ask, make great again, which point in history was the part we're trying to replicate? What about all the details of that? Point in time, what do you want again? Okay, this is just a few notes at the end, science of stories. We don't have to, I can sort of just point to this. We have a paper that we're going to write over the next year, connected with +1, so it's going to be a foundational paper on the science of stories, just sort of outlining this as a sort of future area. Maybe 20 to 30 papers will come in that will be part of a collection, right? So there's going to be this pitch to invite people to submit to it, and then they'll be published over a couple of years. +1 is this gigantic thing. I think at some point got close to publishing 100 papers a day, which is absurd. And so obviously this is not a printed thing, this is just something that lives online. And so making a collection is a very easy thing for them to do and a natural thing to do. So it's not really a central place for thinking about stories, although, it's really everywhere. Political science, people, obviously folklore, and so on. Communication departments, which rose out of propaganda, but they have an odd feeling to them. They've done very well in many places, but in terms of research, I often hear them say, well, we don't have anything we created ourselves. We don't have our own methods, which is odd. So it's sort of getting confused about what science is, right? It's about the area you study, and right. So if they'd made their own method, they'd feel special, instead of the economists telling them they're not worth it. Yeah. So anyway, so there are just a few pieces at the end here. Don't have to worry about this too much, but right? That stories are just this incredibly important part of what's going on, and I made them and I know stories have a feeling to them that word can make them sound soft, perhaps, or like they're fun, they're kid things, but that's not true at all. People are often thinking very, very simple stories, right? Like this leads to that, and so on, and broken down. So we need to lift out of that, because if you think about 300 million people or billions of people, the story becomes much more, it's harder to grasp, and you end up with things like climate change and no one being able to do anything about it, because it requires, long-term thinking and understanding systems of people, and if you just do something wrong, then it doesn't matter, right? Being able to just identify the spectrum of stories. We have this project we're calling Story Wrangler, of course Story Finder, which we've had for years. We're trying to build, how do you, all these, say, just tweets or any kind of media coming in, how do you extract stories from them? And then beyond that, here's an event that happened, here's sort of the plot of it. What are the frames around it? How is it being talked about? How do we do that automatically and sort of identify, for example, conspiracy theories, like bad things.